Welcome. We're just going to have a little music, have a little bobblehead action for a second while people join us. Stay tuned. Enjoy the music. Shake it out a little bit. If you're just joining, we're just going to enjoy music for a couple minutes. A few pieces of my Wonder Woman collection are going to entertain you. Just give everyone a minute or two to join us. Thanks for joining. Just a few more seconds and we'll get started. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you're joining, good evening. I think I might have someone joining from Copenhagen. Hint, hint, that's my daughter. Thanks for joining LinkedIn Live with us today. SheMoney. Welcome. We're obviously going to be taping this for if you're watching this on replay. Thank you for joining as well. And before we begin, I want to just take a moment. It's tradition here at ShePlace and SheMoney to do a land acknowledgement of Indigenous peoples whose unceded lands we're calling from. Maureen and Charlie will be joining us from Palm Springs, California, the land of the Kahui people. And we are here in Utah, the ancestral lands of the Ute Tribal Nation and the Northwestern Band of Shoshone Nation. So thank you. Welcome to SheMoney. I'm so excited to have two amazing guests with me today. I'm blessed to call them not only guests, but friends. And welcome, Maureen and Charlie.
Hi, Jacki.
Start with the bubble.
I know.
We just want to have a party.
Well, in theme of today, namaste. And thank you for being with us today. I have signs. This is supposed to be fun. It's lunch hour for some people, maybe cocktail hour for others. But Maureen, I want you to meet Maureen Pelton and Charlie Hartwell. I'm going to have them do their own little introductions, but just as a bit of framing, if you haven't read already the SheMoney article that came out on Tuesday, that kind of frames the conversation a little bit. Maureen is one of the founders of the ShiftIt Institute, I think, and a pioneer in the field of embodiment, and just an amazing woman, 40 years, so a trained therapist, and oh my gosh, every modality known to man, and her partner, significant other, husband, Charlie Hartwell, hardcore feminist. We got a feminist man in the house, of course, at SheMoney. Charlie, yes, I might have to dig into that a bit with you, Charlie. Charlie's also incredible human, managing director of the Bridge Builder Collaborative. Both of them are just investors with purpose, to say the least. And I thought before I, say more, why don't Maureen, over to you just to share a little bit about yourself.
Okay. I'm passionate about human flourishing. I always have been. I've spent my career interested in human development, spirituality, consciousness, and embodiment. And I've worked, in the corporate world. I've had a private practice. I've worked in the medical world. And with Charlie, we've just been really committed to how do we support bringing applications, tools, technologies, platforms forward for the masses so that they have access to their own personal empowerment, human flourishing, and sovereignty. And yes, my husband is a feminist. Oh my gosh. And you have to talk to him about it because he calls me out sometimes when I've got my own internal misogyny going on.
Wow. That is, yeah, I love that. And actually, Charlie, passing it over to you, I did hear you speak recently at an event with Gratitude Railroad, a group of investors there. And I was sitting beside you, but I was like, hello, thank you. To have a white male investor, really talking about the importance of inclusion and practices, and not in a way that feels marginalized or deficit, but just the opposite, just as absolutely important, relevant, and an incredible opportunity. I would say thank you, Mr. Hartwell, and please talk a little bit about
yourself. Wow. I don't know what to say now. In my life, I think I would describe myself as a change agent. I'm a Harvard Business School graduate. I've worked in 14 different industries. I've worked in the corporate world. I've worked in the startup world, the nonprofit world. I've been CEO. I've done turnarounds. I am a passionate feminist. One of my businesses was actually helping the two women to become the first two women to cross the continent of Antarctica on foot. And we used that expedition called the Bancroft Arneson Expedition to really help drive a global message about for girls and women. Like, if these two women can do this, then what can you do with your lives? That was a really fun business to be involved with. And now I get to work with Maureen on helping build a global movement around human flourishing, consciousness, spirituality, and helping people to get more in touch with themselves and their purpose. And it's just, what a fun life. And by the way, can I just say, because I collected comic books, how awesome it was to be on an interview with a comic book bobblehead starting the interview. That was awesome.
That's good. Well, we've got to have fun. Sometimes, especially right now, the world feels so heavy and serious, and it is. I mean, we're here in COVID sort of lockdown craziness, and when I thought about what to write about for the first issue of She Money magazine, and focusing on wellness, setting intention, and actually, Maureen, not that this was sort of top on the list, but I just love when I talk to you about sort of this and the difference between intention and goal setting. So maybe I'll just put that on the back burner. We'll get to that. But I could think of no two people better to write about for She Money, because you're really combining this idea of wellness and self. And I want to push into your investment thesis a little bit, but even consciousness, which is some ways is a big word. I kind of Googled it, and there are lots of different definitions, but you use that word a lot. Charlie does, in terms of, your work, and of course in the investment thesis. But I'd love for you to just take a second to talk about what that means to you and the importance of it, and then how you really weaved it into this investment thesis that you have.
Yes. Well, you're right. There's lots of definitions and lots of different perspectives and arguments among the scientists about what consciousness is. But for me, it's about a sense of being and knowing. It really has a lot to do with embodiment. And it's about moving beyond our actual intellect, which I love mine. I love my intellect, but it's moving beyond the conditioning, the narratives, the reactions, and moving into that space of groundedness, quiet, centered presence, pausing, and being able to access information from other places, whether it's sensing or feeling or intuiting. It's not just our intellect, which, the job of the intellect is to collect data, analyze data, sort data, disseminate data. It's awesome. But that's a knowledge-based thinking, whereas a consciousness for me is body-based awareness. So it's kind of like, we've all had those experiences when we just know something, and then it happens, but we don't know why we know it. Like the phone rings, you're like, oh, that's my grandma. And you pick it up and it's your grandma. It's just that space, that quiet space where we just know.
Yeah, and that's so interesting, because obviously talking about this in the context of investment and how you pick companies and what you choose to invest in is, little out there. I mean, I think most people know I spent my career at Goldman Sachs, and if we had been talking about this, put my hands in intuitive trading in the fixed income markets, let me feel this trade, maybe that wouldn't work too well. But now it is, going and feeling more mainstream, and it's not head and heart, and often the terms are masculine and feminine too, that get kind of labeled as intellect versus intuition, which I don't think is a fair framing at all. And I want to invite you to speak to that, Charlie, because obviously you and Maureen are partners, but what I love, you're a power couple. What I mean, power and power to, not power over, and you're weaving together like these very exceptional backgrounds and traits and sort of meeting with, how you approach not only just your investing, but how you're identifying these companies, how you're working with them, coaching them. So speak a little to this consciousness. And most of your, bridge builder partners, not obviously, but are male. So, as a feminist man that married to Maureen, that's taking all this into, your work and your practice as an investment professional. Talk a little bit about that in the context of consciousness, and then weave it into what Bridge Builder has been doing.
Well, can I start with something different, just to describe a little bit more just the relationship that Maureen and I have? Like the way I describe it, or we describe it, is in our relationship, Maureen is the wisdom. Maureen is the multidimensional being. She's really grounded and practical, has a long, amazing career in integrative health and, so many modalities that she's trained in. But like when I listen to her wisdom, then I'm the third dimensional Harvard Business School guy that knows how to get shit done. Can I say shit? Yeah. Get shit done in the third dimension. And so like a lot of my job actually is just doing my best job listening to the wisdom, because it really was Maureen that got me into this field. It was really Maureen who changed our investment philosophy for the way I looked at it like 4 years ago. And, just with that as a backdrop, I just want to honor that, the wisdom. And then she does a great job of honoring that, my third dimensional gifts. So I just want to start, there.
Thank you.
So, from an investment philosophy, maybe can I go back and just describe what our philosophy was, and then how it's transformed over the last 10 years?
Absolutely.
So, when we started, our thesis was around mind training. So you were talking before about, Goldman Sachs, and knowing your experience there. When I would walk around and talk to companies about mindfulness 10 years ago, they thought I was crazy. Now I can't find a firm anywhere in the investment world that doesn't have mindfulness as a practice that they're, promoting to their employees and wanting them wanting them to use. So we started in finding companies that were in the mind training space. So we were early pioneers in the digital therapeutic space, software as drugs, or software as drug enhancements. We started looking at companies in the mindfulness space. We started in early models in the behavioral health space. 7 years into that, we'd made some of the seminal investments in that space. We could point to 100 million people meditating that hadn't been meditating on platforms that we'd invested in. And Maureen sat me down one day, the wisdom, and she said, "Charlie, you've been investing in the gateway drugs, the higher levels of consciousness. It's time to go deeper." And and the way things work in the universe is like, once that intention was set, all of a sudden we found a new partner, Bo Shao, who was just launching a $100 million fund, exactly in what Maureen had been describing. This is within a month of setting this intention. And then in our next meeting, in our next annual meeting, our partners said, "We've been investing in this other space. It doesn't need us anymore. What are we going to do next to make impact?" And so we settled on this go deeper strategy, which is to invest in companies that help people go deeper, to connect more with themselves, to connect something to others, and to connect with something greater than themselves. So we've really shifted over the last 3 years into more around consciousness, spirituality, and deeper levels of mental health.
Yeah, that's incredible. And just to mention a few of your companies, InsightTimer, Pear Therapeutics, Muse, Headspace, Happify Health, Sana Health, and again, I think they're named companies. I think a couple of them are public already, but these are companies that, did not exist a decade ago. I mean, and to your point about mainstreaming mindfulness and making it accessible and affordable, and socially acceptable, like you said, in business and, in other spaces as well. So just to that point, Charlie, and obviously I'm curious about a couple emerging fields, and I know there's a couple of companies you love, Maureen, that you've talked to me about, like High Five Networks, et cetera, which I'd love to chat about, but I'd love to just chat a few minutes about the whole psychedelic space, because when I met you, I mean, I really know nothing about it. I think I heard about a film or two, maybe Sundance, which is starting today, by the way, if for folks, you can still buy tickets. Oh, and just PS, feel free to post comments and questions in the chat, because we have folks monitoring them, and we'll filter them in. But, in terms of behavioral health, and I'm curious about, Maureen, other sort of, maybe they're not investable companies in the sense that it can be as mainstreamed as some of the mindfulness ones, but, there's the whole area of psychedelics, and I didn't even know until recently that there was an psychedelic ETF, and you said to me, Charlie, there are 50 companies that are now public in this space. I just think it's something not a lot of people know about, the science that's emerging, and the MAPS organization, which I think is, Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. Like, this is a huge emerging area, and would love, for you to comment a minute about the science behind this. And, and you've both shown some concern as well about when capitalism gets a hold of something like this. So just, can you talk about that space a little bit?
Yeah, so we started to really look at that space a few years ago, because we're really hopeful and wanting to be supportive of people alleviating their own inner suffering. That's part of raising consciousness and human flourishing. But we were never really interested in the drug companies. We've really been interested in the ecosystem around it, because what the science shows, if done correctly with set and setting and intention, and therapeutically, it's, psychedelic assisted therapy, it can be profoundly impactful, and even I would go so far as to say curative. And it's really being used quite a bit with the with veterans, and they're finding a lot of success. And there's so much science, but I just have to tell you, there was so much science in the 50s, I think it was, and the government shut it down. And the science that's happening today is validating what we already knew back then. But the problem, the challenge with it for me, after 2 years of kind of swimming around in this, is that the way it is done, the set and setting, the ecosystem around it is not growing appropriately or as quickly as the drug companies are. That's where capitalism has come in, and there's a lot of money to be made here, perhaps, as things become more legal. But the issue around doing it correctly and having enough people trained to facilitate it is where we're challenged.
Yeah, I can speak just a little bit more to that. The funding for this, up until the last statistic I saw, was that 87% of the funding was going to the drug companies, and there was something like 200 or 300 different compounds that were being developed. And then you take psilocybin, or that's called a lot of people call them mushrooms, and you've tried to find some intellectual property around it. And my perspective is we don't need 200 or 300 compounds. We need about 5 to 10, but then we need a system to bring it so that we actually get great therapists, as Maureen was saying, get great therapists and a great set and setting to help people with actual healing. And it's not the drugs that actually do that. They're just part of a whole ecosystem to support this. So there's a concern that if we don't do this properly, and if we make claims that aren't substantiated in the field, which I'm concerned about, that we'll go right back to where we were in, in the 60s or 50s. And so it's really important in this field, from my perspective as an investor, that we not be short-term focused on how do we, because it's a land grab. Stock prices, but at the same time, stock prices have come down like 60% over the last 3 or 4 months because there's so much hype around this. And so it's concerning, but it's also really promising.
Yeah, and thank you. There are a few comments in the chat around this. Kirsten and Elizabeth, I think there's so much interest in, and maybe speak to that, and we could stretch it out into, what does it really take? I mean, I want to talk more about conscious capitalism and if there is such a thing, or consciousness capitalism, because, like you said, there can be land grabs and money grabs around protocols and opportunities that, actually really do help and serve people. And I think it's the point, having investors, having founders, having investors, having consumers, and, that are not just well-intended, but are kind of putting these checks and balances around, how companies price and products that are coming forward, especially in this area of wellness. And I think you look at, there were some comments about insurance companies not covering certain protocols. And, so to just ask that bigger question, when you think about a world where we are well, inside out, and that we bring that to our communities and, to our families, what does that world kind of look like to you? And how, as consumers and investors, do we help accelerate that pathway? It's a really big question. Sorry about that, but I know you can tackle it.
Yeah, and I'm going to see if I heard you correctly, but I just want to say something about the insurance companies, because I've been involved in integrative health for over 20 years of trying to push that boulder up a hill, in specifically in a big medical setting, but in general. And so much of it's philanthropic because we can't get the insurance companies to reimburse, even though there's pretty good science around it. So the insurance, insurance companies are really challenging. Our healthcare system, as many of you know, is quite challenging in this country. So I think part of my interest years ago in wanting some applications, as I was calling them back then, to really empower people is what we could provide affordably. So there are a lot of apps, platforms, and technology out there that are not very expensive, that can really support you in your own mental well-being and even, physical health, quite frankly. And that is the impact we've been having. And the good news is, and Happify is a really good example, but the good news is Charlie did a great job early on getting insurance companies involved and engaging with them. And so insurance companies have been aware, and insurance companies actually have been partnering with some of our companies. Happify.com was a company, one of our first companies, which I happen to love. And they were these two guys who were saying, let's see what we can do with an app around happiness and even start to create some of the science around it. So they launched this fun app. They came from the gaming industry. They launched this fun app, which is now, this is 8 or 9 years, now developed into Happify Health. And Charlie knows a lot more. In fact, he just got off a board call, but they're like, I'm blown away with what's happened with this particular app and the impact it's had both in the corporate world and in the healthcare world. So I feel like even through these applications, we are starting to impact, the healthcare world. And I agree with affordability, but it's challenging and it's slow. It's a lot slower than I want it to be. Let me put it that way. And I just want to add that, in a very grandiose vision, between psychedelics done right and mindfulness and meditation and neurofeedback and all of our, our digital therapeutics, I would like to change the mental health care system.
So what is that? I mean, yes. And what does that look like? Maureen. So if you could wave that magic wand, you know, and have your wishes come true a little bit in terms of that, what does that actually look like? And not to be so hypothetical, I mean, but let's set intention around this, because it's so, especially now, it's a mental health crisis. I mean, everywhere, you know, and especially amongst younger generation. Or I feel like at the age of 57, I'm also suddenly having my, you know, mental health crisis too. But seriously, like, what did it look like?
Well, to me, what it looks like is we wouldn't call it mental health care anymore. It would be whole person health. We wouldn't separate. And we wouldn't separate it. We would see that all of it, mental, emotional, physical, energetic, spiritual, that makes us whole. That's who we are. And they all intertwine. And it's just not that simple. And separating it out and calling it mental is, in my opinion, after 38 years in the field, it's not fair. So, and I do think there are people who see that, you know, Alice Walton and the work they're doing down in Bentonville. I mean, I think they really get that. And so I that's what I would like to see, but.
So can I just like go back to something you told me years ago, which has been really helpful as I think about reframing this whole field, because we have had a model, as Maureen described, of a saviorism model. There's a doctor that's going to fix you. There's a pill that's going to fix you. And if you go to one of self-responsibility, now all of a sudden you're the center of your healthcare and you're taking responsibility for it. And there are tools, and you know, doctors can assist you, and medicine can assist you, but other tools can assist you. And Maureen was just mentioning, you know, the Whole Health Institute. I was on a call with them yesterday, and the center of the way they look at the healthcare universe, the center of the core is the question, what's your purpose? Like in the healthcare system, who asked that question? Yeah. Like, what's your purpose? You know, and then around that is, what's your care team? What are you doing to take care of yourself? All of these things. So all of a sudden the system becomes something to support you and who you know yourself to be, and to help you to understand your purpose. But if you understand your purpose, and you know, and you have the support around you to help you to do that, we can change the healthcare system. But it really, we're now at this outside in approach versus inside. Yeah, genius, but that goes to her.
But I mean, yes, right? I mean, to your point, like, it's a total reframe. And, you know, someone a long time ago, I'll give Nancy Mannix a shout out, someone who I got to know through Women Moving Millions, my other organization, talked about this dominant narrative, like the power of the narratives, and that we have about rugged, I mean, it's both rugged individualism, but it's also this outsourcing your wellness, you know, to your point, you know, like, and I feel, I mean, you're just saying something so fundamentally different, right? And in terms of what I love about this, and that's sort of why you two were, I mean, you're interesting for a million different reasons, but you can have these beliefs and then you say, well, how do we actually make it and manifest this in the world? And a big part of that is how money moves, right? Like, how do these companies and the science actually get structure that isn't just philanthropic? Though, you know, I'm curious, when you look at the, you know, capital as a, you know, pure charitable capital to, you know, through the stretch of, you know, VC and its, you know, kind of do or die mentality for multiple X returns, when we have to bring financial resources and other resources to this vision and to this science. And I think that's one of the things that's so fascinating about what you two are doing, because you've shown, you can do it, and you can do it in a, you know, in a heartfelt, honest, you know, appropriate way. And you both think so smartly about like the role of money in the world. But it's important, you know, and if it wasn't so, and some of this might be willing to take different types of returns or structure companies differently. And, you know, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that. What does it mean for money? And you two and Bridge Builder really have been on the forefront of being a leading funder in this space. But how does money need to like be aligned with this in a way that feels right and authentic and life-giving, and not just extractive, you know? And, you know, I'm thinking of Voldemort, you know, like sucking the air out of the universe. Like, we want to put air into the universe, not suck it out of the universe, right? So talk a little bit about that.
Well, can I just provide an example of
Sure.
a type of company, that I think just is quite a different model. As I think about this as an investor, I don't think of it about, we're not driven by the returns. We're driven by impact, and our returns are really good. Like we didn't have to make a trade-off on returns, but we started with what's the impact that we want to make in the world, and we start with an abundance model. And one of the greatest examples from my perspective is this company InsightTimer. So I just look at it as a platform of abundance, because everywhere you turn, there's abundance for someone. So this is a company located in Sydney, Australia. It's a community of 20 million people, 500,000 use it every day. There are 10,000 teachers on the platform teaching in 40 different languages. These are spiritual teachers, scientists, business leaders, etc., that are imparting their wisdom to this community that's passionate about the brand. There are 124,000 free meditations on the platform. So anyone from any income, can access the platform. And then, you can access teachers and you can pay for things as well. So when you look at the platform of abundance, you say for people around the world in any language, you get all these resources. For teachers, the 10,000 teachers, they get promotion that they would have a really hard time getting on their own to this large audience, and they can derive revenue, from the platform in a variety of ways. And, because of that, we can grow the team. So the team is experiencing abundance. The community is growing. They've grown to 20 million without ever spending any marketing money. It's all been organic growth. And with all that happens, we're going to do fine as investors. We're going to do really well. But it's not about looking at it and saying, it's not just about the bottom line.
Yeah, I love that. Well, and, when you look at the portfolio, I'm curious because, I'm somewhat critical of the standard VC model. One, it tends to be the decision makers, no offense, Charlie, are white male. 98% of the decision makers around where venture capital goes or early stage capital goes is, a certain demographic. And of course, those that receive that capital is somewhat aligned, right? And so something is not fundamentally working in the world when capital is, the decision making is made by a few going to a certain type of demographic. And I'm curious, when you look at your portfolio companies and who's founding these companies, I know you don't have a specific sort of gender or diversity mandate when you decide what companies, but I'm curious, and they're wonderful, obviously amazing white men. This isn't to put people in buckets, but I'm curious when you look at the founders and the ecosystem around this space, who are those people, and Maureen, I know you do a lot of coaching around that too, but, who are these founders and, what could you say about sort of folks? Because I think, entrepreneurship and people wanting to roll out and start companies that actually serve people and serve humanity, I think is growing. So just share a little insight about some of these people behind all these companies.
Well, for bridge builders, we've about, I think it's 35 to 40% of our companies have female founders or co-founders. It has tended to be more white. We're finding more diversity. But most of the pitches over the last 10 years, I would say a lot of them have been by white males. I think that's shifting and changing, and probably not at the pace that I'm happy with. But increasingly, as we look at companies, I ask questions like, okay, so who are the co-founders? And then, what's the board and what's the employee base? What's the senior leadership? And I believe that the companies that embrace diversity in all sorts of ways are going to do better. I hope for more of it. I encourage it. And yeah.
Well, and I agree. And I just want to add, because I think this is important and unique to bridge builders, is all of the partners, as well as all of the entrepreneurs, CEOs, have to be doing their own inner work. That's right. I mean, we've seen some entrepreneurs have good ideas, but they have not done their own inner work. And so that's not the type of entrepreneur we support. With Bridge Builders, we find these entrepreneurs and these startups, and we really support them. It's right. I mean, we're in there. We really support them on many levels. And so we really have to have people who are committed to their own inner work.
And just to add to that, we had a partner meeting this year, and and we didn't do any business. We focused all on our internal work and our group work. And, we have monthly meetings and we have business meetings, et cetera. But the partners at the end of that said, okay, when we're in person, for in-person meetings, we never want to have another business meeting again. This is the work that we want to do. We can do business meetings on Zoom, but when we're together, let's go deeper ourselves. And there's a belief, from an investment perspective, one of my partners said to me last year, Charlie, if I want to change the world through investing in conscious companies, I first have to do my own work, or else it won't work. Like the whole thing won't work. I've got to focus first on my own inner work. And that was inspiring.
Well, and Maureen, you talk about this in terms of the evolving sort of investment thesis. And I'll say it's true for me. Like I mean, I could literally cry if I were to look at you. You're kind of small on my screen right now, but if you were like, how much I love and adore you, and how much you came into my life at a time when it's been really challenging. And when I'm seeking to do that inner work, right? Like, and it's, I think you can cruise through life, and not having, unless a crisis hits or something hits, and, then you kind of like, oh my gosh, like maybe I wasn't all what I thought I was, and things weren't as fit together as I thought they were. And that's a blessing. I find that now a blessing to have cracked a little, because it not crapped me open. It did not crap me open. It cracked me. More vulnerable. And I think key to this, I'm obsessed with Brene Brown and Krista Tippett, who comes from Minneapolis, where you all are. But, what does that really mean? Like, not that, in 10 minutes, we're going to have the key to inner work. But when you say that, and how it has to, I want a t-shirt that says change starts here, with that arrow to self. But right. This is with the health field too, right? Like, you look to other people always, like, what does it mean to start here? And when you think of social transformation or social change, it has to start here with the individual, and then with the ones we see and touch and feel. And, so talk a little bit more about that inner work and how you're seeing that move into the social change world, and what, and obviously what happens when you're trying to do social change without doing the inner work, then that's kind of saviorism in a different form, right?
Right. It is saviorism. Inner work is really about returning, remembering our own inner navigational system of our own innate wisdom, our own intrinsic wholeness. And it means, we call it inner work because the outer world is so influential, right? The beliefs, the stories, the expectations. And so we don't even know it. We're born, we're growing up, we're getting conditioned, and we are really focused on the external world, accomplishing, pleasing, being defined by the external world. And, our actually adult development, our 20s are supposed to be about kind of sorting through, who am I and what's coming from my family system, my religious system, my community that isn't mine, that I don't agree with, that maybe served me but doesn't anymore. And to start to really sort through, well, what is mine? What is true for me? And really including ourselves. And, an example for me is I've always been a deeply spiritual person, and I was raised Catholic. And so I was really Catholic. Like, I went to church. I wasn't, I did all the different things, and I was very involved in the church until I was 18. And then I was like, wait a minute, why am I Catholic? What about all these other religions? And I went to my parents and I said, why are you Catholic? And they're like, because my parents were Catholic. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to check this out. So I did my own exploration in my years in college and decided religion in general wasn't for me. Religion itself was man-made in my experience and very patriarchal in my experience. So I didn't really find a religion, but I really committed to my own truth and inner knowing, which is, I'm spiritual. I do believe in something greater than myself. And I do pray and I do meditation and I connect to that source that's greater than me. But that's mine. So that's just an example of, really returning to who we are and letting go of all of the anxiety and stress and even depression that comes with being something that we're not, being something that we're conditioned to be.
Yeah, I love that. What's coming to mind, I see that picture of me in the back there with Gloria Steinem, and and thinking about the talking circles and the consciousness raising, that we have her to thank for, and in terms of the first wave of feminism. And I think we could take a hard pivot there. Let's just take a soft pivot, because I think it means a lot for women. And again, you said it, internalized misogyny and the world in which we grow up, and not saying it's easy for anyone right now. There's a lot of cultural expectations, one brought upon us from different external identities. This question, I think it's the reckoning of our time, is what is identity? And realizing it's not just a construct that lives out, outside, that we're trying to shove ourselves into, but especially for women, and especially I think, and why I think it's so beautiful to see you two paired together talking about, what it means to be, like, you complete me. I love that line in Jerry Maguire. But what it is, and it's not that you complete me, but the complementary nature of what we bring to the table. And that is ultimately the value of diversity. But particularly for women, to be able to show up in a way that isn't about all these external things, and also with our pocketbooks, because She Money, at the end of the day, and my mission and purposes for decades has been around financial and economic empowerment, and seeing money. I think someone said that, I'm not sure who said it in the chat, is a resource. It's energy, it flows. And especially as women, if our ability, and like men, and to align that energy and that flow of resources to make the world into what we want it to be, is something that I think in our groups, and we've had some money mingles and things here, it's just so, we're so not there yet. Money is, it's just not a positive energy in the world. And I think that's what you two exemplify around that. But I'm curious, Maureen, in terms of your own relationship with your financial resources and being in partnership with Charlie and Bridge Builder around this, what's your counsel? Because you're one of the most, I don't know if I like the word empowered, but, whole, beautiful individuals and energetic beings, as you said, in physical form. Like, talk a little bit about your relationships to those resources. And when you think about your coupleness and how you make those decisions together, I'm curious about that.
Yeah. So if I understand the question correctly,
you have to kind of like dig for it after my little rant. I'm sorry about giving you a shovel.
I think I know. I mean, I'm just around money. I do think money is energy, right? And years, I was raised in the scarcity model, for sure. And I made a very conscious choice in my 20s when I was doing a lot of self-inquiry. Like, I didn't want to live in the scarcity model. So I switched to the abundance model. And I have lived in that. And that's not just with money, that's with everything. But I switched into that model of abundance. And it wasn't easy. And I had to, do some hard work. But because I chose, so much of my energy, my intention, my choices are around abundance. I get that reflected back to me. So our resources, which I value, we live in abundance, and we're thoughtful about our distribution of resources and our management of resources. But when I met Charlie, he too lived in abundance. So it was easy because, and we've taught our children to live in abundance. So for me, you know, and one of the things one of our daughters has said to us is, she's like, Mom, I feel so blessed. I have so much, and then I kind of feel obligated because of it to do something. And I'm like, no, like, I don't want you doing that. That's the old model, you know, obligation. I want you to do what brings you joy, and trust that that will, you know, in return be giving to, and it is, she does. But there is that conditioning around scarcity, around if you have a lot, you're obligated. And we just choose not to live in that. And, you know, I think when you do live in that, you're making choices. I mean, one of the things I see, if people aren't doing their own inner work, they're making choices that aren't true to them, that they're attached to something, or they want an outcome, or they're trying to prove something, and it usually doesn't go well. Right. And that is not the space we're in.
Can I say something?
Charlie, I'm curious about your response to this and your own background as it relates to abundance versus scarcity.
I was going to say, I'm not sure Maureen is completely correct. Like, I think when I met Maureen, I did have an abundance mindset, but I didn't come from a family with an abundance mindset. Yeah. So I also had a, you know, very entitled view of money. I come from a wealthy family in the Midwest, you know, generations old. And, you know, there was a lot of entitlement. And, you know, our family was a patriarchy family. I mean, women and men were bought into the patriarchy. It didn't resonate with me. But what I want to say is, you know, when Maureen came into my life, she began to question even some of the financial decisions that I was making. And it, like, working together with her questions, and then I'd have to, you know, I'd get pissed for a second, and then I'd have to actually, like, look at my own patterns. Like, I think that I live in a lot more abundance because she came into my life, and because she asked questions about how I was managing my finances. And it wasn't, I mean, on one level, and I'm trying to talk about something that's bigger here between men and women. On one level, it was completely threatening to have someone questioning, you know, my financial management. On another level, when I could get down, you know, to a deeper level, it's like, oh my God, what a blessing. And I look at what's happened in our life and for our kids' lives since we've come together. And yes, I live in abundance, but I really want to honor that it's not just about me living in abundance. It's about us living in partnership and abundance, and actually through partnering and listening to, you know, the wisdom over here, like this, like on so many levels, life is more abundant.
Yeah. I love that so much.
I wanted to say something about that because I forgot about that, interestingly enough, because it's been a number of years. But you're right. Again, this is a really good example of conditioning. When I met Charlie, he'd grown up in this wealthy family, and there was a way they did things that he just, like, I was Catholic as my family. He was just doing things a certain way because that's what his family did. And then that's what you do. So my questions were more curious, like, why are you doing it that way? That's not how I would do it. And he started to realize, oh, I really haven't thought about this for myself. I've just been following the conditioning. And once he started to do that, I mean, you're thriving even more.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. It's such a great example. And what was popping in my head is my relationship, you know, with Greg, as you know, my husband, and, you know, we really are partners in life, and partners, especially in not especially, but in our financial decisions. And I feel like so many couples aren't. And, you know, it's seeing that, to your point, Charlie, so much benefit. And it's hard when you're pushing up, you know, I'm the breadwinner, I make the financial decisions, and you make those decisions. But, you know, there's so much benefit. Like the number of women that I've spoken to, you know, that don't feel like there's space for them to be financial partners, you know, with their spouses. You know, or even women growing up in general to be, you know, we know women are, you know, younger women even are much more less likely to be investors and to engage with their financial resources. So I think examples like you two of how to do it together and seeing the complementarity, and the comfort and the safety, too, that comes with being in partnership. Yeah, and the courage that comes forward to kind of go and do things in your own life that, where you feel supported and in community. It's so beautiful. You two are just beautiful. So I just want to be mindful of time. And if you have questions, please feel free to post in the chat. But I'd love to pull it back a little bit into, some of the takeaways that, there are folks today, I think, on the call or might listen to it. And again, if you're watching this on replay, thank you, which is, how do we use, our investment capital differently? So, this idea of conscious capitalism, impact investing, and not everyone has the capacity to do that. But, to the extent you can, again, Bridge Builder is an amazing example of a model of people coming together to share resources, but also how we can use our purchasing power and, who we support on social media, like buy the products and services. I'd like to pull it back a little bit, to any sort of, again, and wrapping up a little bit. So what didn't we talk about as it relates to, some of this that you'd like to give folks just to think about?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think just changing to an abundance mindset from a scarcity mindset. When you do that, it's just like at least from my experience, when you change that, a whole bunch of things open up that you might not even be thinking about. Excuse me. The second, I'd say, from an investment perspective, I really want to credit the partners who I've invested in, like, as opposed to each of them are, could do this on their own with their own family offices. And they came together and said, we can make better decisions if we do this together, like through a collaborative model, which is a much more feminine model in my experience. We can make better decisions, and we don't have to trade. We don't have to trade economic returns to do that, but we can actually have fun, and we can support the companies, and we can be involved, and we can each add our own unique value to this. That's just a very different way of investing. And so I think, if we're going to solve the world's problems, regardless if it's financial or not, it's going to be through collaboration, not through sort of the old model, which is a much more patriarchal model.
Right.
Maureen, I have a question from you from Susan. Let me put my glasses on to read this. Maureen, when and where did you recognize that we are not meant to follow a conditioning we grow up with?
Can you say that again?
The question is that it says, Maureen, when and where did you recognize that we are not meant to follow a conditioning we grow up with?
Oh, gotcha. So, my dad would say when I was like 2, because I questioned everything. Like I'm one of 4, and I was not an absorbent sponge like my siblings. Like I questioned everything from when I can remember. So I already had that curious mind, but I think it was when I was in graduate school and really looking at human development that you really start to understand it, because this was really broken down and all the science around human development, that really from the moment of conception, we are being conditioned. And that's natural, like it's developmental. We go through these developmental stages and we're getting conditioned, which is fine. But then the piece we're missing is then, late teens, early 20s and on into adulthood, that development is really about returning to our true nature and to letting go of that conditioning and finding new ways of operating that work for us. Because some of the things we did as children in our family systems was to help us function as a system, and that's not wrong. But as you get older, you may not want to continue in that pattern. You may want to change that. It may not serve you anymore. Yeah. So I questioned everything from the beginning, but it was really when I started to study human development that you really understood how conditioned we are.
Yeah. I feel like, maybe you could, I know you two are so interested in this. Well, our daughter is studying neuroscience. She's pursuing a neuroscience major. And, it feels like, and there's so much now coming out about the brain and, obviously how therapies are aligning with, some of new ways to recreate the neuroplasticity and epigenetics, not just throw out terms, but we're
Right.
learning so much more about how these systems and belief systems we carry with us, right? And it takes, intention and awareness to reevaluate and question so much of this. And I'm just curious, when Maureen and Charlie, in the last couple minutes, if you have, I feel like you two are both just a wealth of resources with like books to read and sites to go to. And, if you're interested in the science behind a lot of this or looking to do your inner work, what are some of the recommendations that you would make?
Oh, goodness. Okay.
Just a couple, not like the whole laundry list. We can always follow up.
Yeah. Well, I think you already mentioned her, but I think Brene Brown has done a really good job of not only doing really good research, but then being able to communicate it in a way that's digestible for people. I go way back. I'm old, so I go way back to Scott Peck and Scott Peck and The Road Less Traveled. There's a lot of good. One of my favorite authors, Ryko, I think is his last name. He wrote How to Be an Adult and How to Be an Adult in Relationship. And it's really simple what adult development is supposed to look like and how we can really, what I call, have personal sovereignty and really take responsibility for who we are and how we're showing up in the world. But there, there's just a lot out there. I don't know specifically. No one else is coming to mind.
Mind and Life.
Around neuroscience and contemplative practice and compassion, the Mind and Life Institute, which is His Holiness the Dalai Lama is involved in. They have 35 years of science. That's awesome. So there's a lot out there to support this. And I think in the end, I think what's hard, again, so this is going to be my experience personally and professionally. I think what's hard is we have to move from the head to the heart. So reading books doesn't change anything. It gives us awareness, but the real work is changing, and that you can't do alone. So finding support to make changes is really where we need to be. And people read books and they get information and it's awesome. And then they have language, but they don't really change. They just have the words. So my encouragement is there's lots of resources and modalities and opportunities out there to really do some deep work and grow and change.
Yeah. Well, and I want to read one more question and then we'll quickly wrap up. Melissa, hi. Thank you so much for joining. A friend of mine from way back when in the Goldman days. She asks, my 21-year-old son is struggling with purpose. Where can he get more information on psychedelic therapy or space discussed to help him flourish? And I think that, I have children in that age too, and I feel like there's pressure to find purpose and meaningful work. And it's, they're kind of at this crossroads of old ways and new ways and landing on them in the middle of a global pandemic. So just curious if you'd have an answer for Melissa for her son, but also just a minute or two on resources for all of us in the context of that question.
Well, first of all, he's 21, did you say?
Yeah, that's what she says.
He's a boy. Okay. So here's the thing. We do know this. He does not have executive function yet. So around 25 for most people, where enough pruning is done that we have executive function. So I would say at 21, you don't need to know your purpose. and not a lot of 21-year-olds do. And I think it's really important to not put that pressure on yourself. If a few, there's a few people who do, but the majority don't. So don't put your pressure on yourself. Just do what brings you joy. Keep following that path. He's gonna be able to pivot. Kids do that today, and he'll find his way. But really, like right now, we should just be having fun and finding things he likes, and eventually he'll know. And he has to trust that he'll know eventually.
Well, we're out. I can't believe an hour has passed already. My gosh. a few wrap-up things. One, if you haven't read the article about Maureen and Charlie on LinkedIn, She Money newsletter, please subscribe and share. You'll find more resources there. Obviously, we're on Instagram at the She Place. And if you're interested in joining, She Place is a community. Maureen's a member of it. It's primarily to serve women and women plus with the mission of helping women flourish. You're welcome to join us at sheplace.com and become a member. There's no charge. We're going to be sharing additional resources, events, a lot of other things. And then, on this investment thesis and bridge builder, we posted a ton of links out there too. And really it's in the context to say, to lift up people and models around, money and the flow of money that's actually doing really beautiful things in the world. So Maureen and Charlie, thank you for joining me on LinkedIn Live. Thank you for all you do in the world. I miss you. Come back to Utah soon. And it's not the same without you. We're going to bop out on some feel-goody music with our Wonder Woman bobblehead. So we're going to keep you on screen if you want to do a little jig. If you want to just sit there and nod, you can do that too. But thanks to the team, Madison and Shay, for helping putting this together. And thank you if you're watching this live.
Thanks, Jacki.
Thanks, Jacki. This is really fun.
It was fun.
Wait for it. Nope. Gotta wait longer.